Cricket, the game of the establishment, the game of the coloniser and a game of the colonised. The game which gave fair play to the language. In 1990, it also became the litmus test of Britishness. During the fat years of empire, cricket was held up to the colonies as a symbol of Britain's decency and honour. It's still a game played almost exclusively by the British and their former subjects. And while the game is still seen as a metaphor for the state of Britain today, it's also come to mean something else, the real measure of a true Brit.
These pledges were made because these islands...
In April 1990, on the eve of the Indian Test series, former Cabinet Minister Norman Tebbit suggested during a television interview that British Asians should demonstrate their loyalty by supporting England.
If you come to live in a country, and if you take up the passport of that country and you see your future and your family's future in that country, it seems to me that's your country. You can't keep harking back.
The Tebbit cricket test, as it came to be known, struck a raw nerve amongst many in the black community as a whole. The pain they feel is still evident today.
It makes you feel angry in a way, because you think, why on earth can't you accept me as a person, as you would anyone else, kind of thing.
It would be good to bat for the British, but it's whether I'd get selected, you know.
I think politicians do it to stir up tensions between black and white.
If we even get a chance to be picked as 12th man, I think that's something. More often than not, we're left behind in the dressing room.
Whatever the intention behind the cricket test, many people in Britain saw it as an attempt to make black Britons forget their past and conform to a white concept of identity. Many black people feel, it seems, that however hard you try, you're never accepted as British. But what does being British really mean? What is it that we're being asked to conform to? When we look at national institutions and landmarks, we often glimpse a land of hope and glory, a Britain devoid of the complex divisions based on race, class, culture. On closer inspection, Britain's identity, as projected to the rest of the world, is surely a fragile one.
I believe passionately in our way of life. We would all say, if we were asked to say what is a characteristic of Britain, everyone would say the same. We're a free country, and we're going to stay that way. We take it for granted. It shouldn't be taken for granted. We believe in freedom and justice. We want peace with freedom and justice. We will argue our case for our way of life against anyone else in the world.
Romantic notions of Britain confuse a clear analysis of Britain's national identity. Lawyer and writer Anne Dummett has spent many years arguing from a broader perspective.
What people think about when they say people should assume British identity or be assimilated into it is very confused, I think, because there's never been a single British identity. And although in any century of the past you can talk about our national character, it changes radically from century to century. And it's changed radically during my lifetime.
You don't have to go too far back in history to realise just how mixed up the British nation is.
This country itself, if you look at it historically, not just over the past 200 or 300 years, but I mean 1,000 years plus. I mean, in terms of, you've had sort of people coming over from Europe, the Vikings, the Celts, and many other people who sort of landed here, colonised it and what have you, I mean, including the Romans.
I don't know if they really ever had a true identity. I mean, who can really say they're truly British when they are, you know, some come from the Saxons, the Normans, you know, it doesn't exist.
British culture usually means something in the mouths of jingoistic people. Personally, I feel English rather than British. And being English means to me a tradition of being allowed to be eccentric if you want to do what you like. Other people aren't going to poke their noses into your life. It's nothing to do with telling other people they've got to conform, which this British culture idea seems to have. That's the opposite of what it seems to me this country is supposed to be all about.
Do we conform to the Welsh way, the Irish way, the Scottish way? This is a society that likes to say there's one thing on one hand and acts in a totally different way on another hand. We cannot conform to that because we are trying, and when I say we, I mean black people, are trying to make this a better society, a society where all people are treated justly and fairly. So the suggestion of conforming isn't really one that's on black people's agenda.
Ireland, Wales and Scotland all maintain at least a modicum of self-expression within the British nation. This is Glasgow. Are black people here able to be themselves?
At the end of the day, we've got to accept that we're British. I mean, we'd like to just be Scottish. If we went to any of the Olympics or any of the big games, and an Englishman wins it, he's an Englishman, he's known as an Englishman. If it was a Scotsman, he's known as a Briton. I see myself as Scottish, and I don't see myself as black, white, green, blue, brown, or, you know, I just find myself as a Glaswegian.
No, I don't see myself as British at all. I see myself as a black Scot.
I see myself as Scottish to an extent, but then the Asian part of me takes over.
If I phone somebody up and say, you know, hello, Mrs. McDonald, and have a chat with her, we can be perfectly, you know, normal and nice to one another and talk about Scottish anecdotes, and then she'll ask me for my name. And then when we get to the name part of it, that's when the problems start. And, you know, she'll say, oh, you know, and where's that name from? And the name is not Scottish. So that's where me and Scotland part company.
Just so it happens that I've got another facet to myself, just like, you know, there's like Welsh people who are British, there are Irish people that are British, Scottish people that are British. It's the same thing. They've got their own culture, we've got our culture.
Geography is not the only complicating factor. Family relationships also play a crucial part in the individual's sense of identity. Here in Newcastle, David Akalatsi married a white woman already expecting a child from a previous relationship. He brought the child up as his own, but others weren't so accepting.
I've never felt different until I was about 9 or 10. When my dad used to take us to school, you know, there used to be a lot of stick given to me dad, which I didn't understand. They know I'm white, and they know I'm walking along with the black family, you know, and they look, you know, as if to say, you shouldn't be walking along with them. Everything was just a muddle. It was too confusing. I couldn't understand things myself properly, and I couldn't understand the attitudes, you know, of the outside people, you know, how they were reacting. I thought, you know, there's no way I'm British. There's no way I want to be British if that's the way the attitudes are. I'm African. As I've grown, you know, older, I'm half and half. I'm half African and I'm half British.
Clearly, there's a lot of confusion around what being British really means. Sivanandan is convinced that the roots of this crisis lie in Britain's political and economic background.
What has happened in Britain is that Britain has fallen behind the technological revolution. It has not kept up with, say, Japan and Germany and the United States of America. And because of that, because it has fallen behind, it's really a third-class power trying to seek a second-class ambitions for a first-class national identity, as it were. Britain has been an empire at one time, has been a great manufacturing power, and it still relies on the things that have gone for establishing some sort of eminence, so that the national pride is about something that has gone, something that is past. It's clinging on to empire, to its nostalgia about its being a great nation of industrial production and so on. And that pride, the content has gone out of that pride. All that remains is the form. That pride clings on to the relics of empire.
The projection of British identity in all its forms ignores black people's part. Those cultural artifacts which reinforce our sense of nationhood, our public monuments, our literature, our museums, conceal black people's role in British history, even in Liverpool, once the slave capital of Europe.
Let the slave grinding at the mill run out into the field.
We say ourselves, right, at one level, I mean, the bricks of this city are cemented together with the blood of black people.
Heavens and laugh in the bright air.
You don't see anything that kind of relates to slavery at all. It's as if the city is very ashamed of it, and at the same time, the wealth of the city is built upon that.
Well, all that we can see around us was built through our wealth, you know, our labor, wealth that has come from our part of the world, and it is here. They don't want to send it back.
The plunder of empire is stacked away in museums as a sad memento of past glories. This museum is crammed with exhibits. No one's sure how many there are, and most may never see the light of day. Along with this burial of the past, the real contribution of the colonies is rarely acknowledged. It's almost as if slavery never happened.
The county museums, the city itself, acknowledges it at the level, oh yes, well, slavery existed, but it played a very minute part of the city's development. I think what, how can we say, British society or white Britons are failing to realise is that we're giving them a hell of a lot. We're enriching their society in many ways. We're not taking anything away from them. If anything, they're benefiting from it. But unfortunately, we're the losers.
But the fact of having been an imperial power defined by racist ideology and a racist culture allows that racist culture to remain and influence the future political economy of the country, when the political economy of the country should engage in getting rid of racism in order to free the forces that are there to make Britain dynamic again.
To those that look beneath the surface, an apparently affluent culture conceals the tensions and divisions in society. To many, it appears that economic decline has gone hand in hand with reduced status in the world, and that the vacuum has been filled by a culture based on lifestyle.
I personally have never seen so many people in tube stations and such begging for money so that they can buy food. So many homeless people. The infrastructure of the country is really crumbling away.
Pride in the country has become distorted, as has pride in the collective spirit of the nation. Britain is beleaguered by social problems, and traditional British values seem to be disappearing fast.
I think there's a lot of white British people who have behaved according to their lights with justice and fair play, and they've had a hard struggle of it in the face of both government attitudes very often, of large institutions. They've had every kind of problem in trying to do this. But I think the word honour, in fact I've often thought this in recent years, is one that people have really put aside. I never see this used in the media these days, except with a sneer or as something talking about the distant past. That's something I very much fear people have lost sight of. The smart money is not on honour these days, and I regret that very much.
Anne Dummett is not alone. Here in London's Chinatown, many would agree with her. Britain's Chinese community feels let down by what it sees as the betrayal of Britain's Hong Kong citizens. The government, they say, by restricting right of entry, has failed the honour test. In the parliamentary debate on the issue, Norman Tebbit made his views clear.
These pledges were made because these islands of ours are already overcrowded,
and in the belief that great waves of immigration by people who do not share our culture, our language, our rules of social conduct, and in many cases who owe no allegiance to our country, was and is a destabilizing factor in society.
I felt very unhappy about it, very upset actually, that Hong Kong people should be rejected by the British people like this, when Hong Kong people have always been loyal to this country. I think the British people think Hong Kong, the territory, is part of Britain, part of the British Empire, but the people, they are not part of Britain. They don't want to know about the people. They just want to get the benefit from Hong Kong.
It's unfair. Only the rich and the professionals can come, whereas the poor and the legitimate have to leave behind.
Currently, there are about 60 to 70,000 Chinese in the whole of Britain. You look around you, where are they? You know, I doubt very much that with future events, Chinese will come and imperialize Britain.
British culture has not taken into account the lessons of its own history, instead of which it has hung on to its past and hung on to the myths about British culture, about British justice, sense of fair play, equality, freedom, all those things that it preached to us. It has forgotten, all that has been forgotten today, and what remains is the form without the content. There is no pride in a sense of justice. There's no pride in a sense of fair play. There's no pride in a sense of giving people their freedoms and letting 1,000 flowers bloom. And the only thing that is there in Britain, I believe, is the fact that black people carry the values, the traditions that Britain once used to boast about. We are the repositories of what used to be fondly known as British culture. The sense of justice, of fair play, of civil rights, of camaraderie, of solidarity, of community. Instead of which Britain today is very individualistic. It's a dog-eat-dog life. It's competitive in the worst possible sense.
Back in India, people think about the not as individual good, but the family. They think about in the terms of the family. But here, people think in terms of the individual. What is good for me? What is it to me? That is the first question that will come into this generation. While the people who settle here first time, they will think of not for themselves, but mainly for what is good for my family, mainly that thing. But slowly it's dying out.
Not giving a toss for those that are below you, really. You know, if you can't make it, that's tough, that's your lookout. Striving for yourself and caring about no one else. I think that has become part of British value. Looking out for yourself entirely and only.
Unlike our parents, who actually heard these myths but hadn't really developed a relationship with white people. So when they came here, they accepted the contemptuous treatment that was heaped upon them. We say we are not going to accept that.
If white Britain has lost the values it once preached to the rest of the world, then maybe black Britain can offer something new. The first Asian woman member of the House of Lords is Baroness Flather. Far from denying her Indian identity, she feels she must promote it.
I think mainstream British culture is undergoing quite a radical change. It's just that people like Norman Tebbit don't want to recognize it, and they feel threatened by it. It's always been my view that cultures must undergo change. They must remain dynamic, and that is what gives them the vitality. I think our coming here is actually revitalizing British culture and British way of life, and we must all see it in a positive light.
And that's it.
Down the way where the skies are grey and the rain falls daily on the umpire's head, we've arrived on the captain's path. The cricket team, Englishmen, fear and dread, but we're glad to say we're in the UK.
something very important to offer to mainstream British culture. We have something very important to offer to ourselves. So why should we reject all that, throw it away in the dustbin, and try to be something for, you know, where we wouldn't be accepted, and also whether we would be any better people anyway for that.
Even cricket itself has failed to make the most of what we have to offer. The problems start at club level. Because black players felt excluded in the past, they set up their own teams, their own leagues, a move not always popular with county cricket administrators, who then offer little or no support.
It's a general feeling throughout the ethnic communities. There's no encouragement in that scene at all. Somehow, it just appears that you have to be white in Yorkshire, and that's it.
Since it was set up in 1863, the county of the White Rose has never fielded a black player in its first team. A recent rule change may alter that, but in the meantime, black players must draw their own conclusions.
I feel like how every black person feels down here who can play cricket, bitter about it, you know, because we've got a lot of young players coming in, I mean, black and Asians. And if we could pick a side, like we said before, to beat Yorkshire, you know, so I've got to feel bitter.
One of the answers to Norman Tebbit would be that society here doesn't make sort of black and Asian people feel welcome. Therefore, they will, in a sense, not so much cling on to, but definitely revert back to their origins. And will see that as a country to be associated with as being warm and welcoming, rather than a country here which makes their sort of existence quite hostile.
People must have their own choice, and if the Asian community here or the West Indian community want to support India, Pakistan or the West Indies in a sporting context, then that's all well and good. In an economic sense, it has to be said that the Asian community, the West Indian community, do support the British community. They must do that. They're working here, they're contributing to the economy, they're paying the taxes, and Mr. Tebbit should be happy at that.
The question of whether or not black people in Britain would identify a la Tebbit with the West Indian cricket team or the Indian or Pakistani cricket teams or not depends on whether or not we are made to feel British in the first instance, right? Especially the people who are born in this country, the so-called British blacks. They are black, but they're not allowed to be British.
However hard you try, it seems something always tells you you're not part of the same team. How can you show greater loyalty than to lay down your life for your country? Many thousands of black soldiers have died fighting for Britain, but no records are kept, even today, of how many black people are in the armed services. Erwin Eversley was a paratrooper in the Falklands War and fought in the key battles of Goose Green and Mount Darwin. On returning to Britain, he found even he hadn't paid a high enough price.
The year after the Falklands, I was serving in Belize, and I applied for a new British passport, and with that I was told I was no longer a British citizen, and I had to pay money to become a British citizen. I couldn't go to the press as a serving member of Her Majesty's Forces. So when I left the forces, I then phoned the Home Office and asked them whether I could actually hand in my medals as payment for my naturalisation, and they refused. I was a bit upset at the time, you know, to think that I came here as a British citizen and I fought for the country, and then I was told that I'm no longer a British citizen. Yeah, it ran out while I was serving in the army, but I didn't actually need a passport while I was serving, because I could travel anywhere on my NATO travel order. Well, I now know that it's not my home, you know, and I'm not accepted here really as a citizen. Well, I fought for this country, but for instance, when the West Indies are over here playing cricket, I would be there sitting and supporting the West Indies. That doesn't make me less patriotic or anything else, you know. I wouldn't, you know, if someone said to me I was unpatriotic, I wouldn't really take any notice of them.
I am not interested in attitudes. I don't give a bugger whether the white people love me or not. What is important for me is that they do not translate their attitudes, their prejudices, in terms of social discrimination. And that the state, the government, does not institutionalize those discrimination in the legislature, in the executive, in the judiciary.
Unfortunately, this is precisely the case. There are no black Lords of Appeal, no black High Court judges, and only one black circuit judge.
There might be a few token posts, but as you say, judiciary,
representation of black and Asian people is virtually zero. Same thing in the higher levels of the civil service, in the police. All the organs of power which the state has were denied influence at a sufficiently high level for us to have any important say.
Out of 650 members of parliament, only 4 are black. Such underrepresentation is only the most glaring example of one characteristic that remains a constant factor in Britain's national identity.
What I'm trying to say is that racism is racism in this country is as old as slavery and as English as Shakespeare. And they haven't been able to break that integument. And within that racist philosophy is built in all the other setbacks that are keeping Britain from becoming a greater nation than it is today.
People have realised that in Britain people judge you by your colour. So it doesn't matter how white you're, you might eat out at pizza parlours every day. You might wear Western clothes. When you're walking down the street, people look at you as black. They see you, they judge you for your colour. Even going for a job, it's based on your colour. You could have so many qualifications, everything's based on your colour.
Because of the colour of our skin and the way we look, we're never classed as British. And that has got nothing to do whether you were born here or whether you were bred here or whether you've lived here, worked, whatever. It's just to do with the colour of your skin.
Norman Tebbit talks about black people, giving up and becoming and integrating into the British society. I did all of that. I mean, I'm married to an English wife. I've accepted most of the values, and she feels that I'm more westernised than the English. And yet I still get bricks thrown at me. I still get humiliated by people that I work with.
It's really your fault that you're not accepted. That's the point that is being made. But there are plenty of people in this country who, I would say misguidedly, do try to be as British as they possibly can, to be accepted. Even they are not accepted. So what is the point? I mean, they have lost what is valuable about their background and their identity, and they have not gained the promised land. So what is the point? I mean, to my way of thinking, you're a loser 2 ways in that case.
Being British and being black doesn't mean anything. You have to be British and white, and therefore, that's as far as it goes with the natives. I never thought being British is meaning to be white. You see, I never grew up thinking that to be British meant to be white. I thought to be British means Britain, for Britain, doing your bit to help England becomes the place we all live in one day.
For empire is no more.